Dana White just lost his mind in an interview with Kevin Ioli where he was brutally confronted to his face about Francis Ngannou's post-UFC success, boxing the likes of Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua for tens of millions of dollars. And Dana White, for the first time, was confronted about this by Kevin Ioli, and he literally lost his mind. He was heated. We're going to check that out in a second, but that's not it. That's not all we have to look at in today's video, because Dana White then went to Contender Series where he had a post-fight presser where somebody asked him about Francis Ngannou as well, and Dana White was visibly angry. The contrast between Kevin Ioli and this media member at the presser was just something that I really want to highlight in this video, because Kevin Ioli did a very good job. He wasn't rude. He didn't go too crazy. He didn't really try to argue with Dana White left and right, but he asked very good questions. And when he tried to counter a little bit, Dana White kind of talked over him a little bit, and then they moved on. They have a very limited time slot. I would have loved for more pushback from Kevin Ioli, but you can't win them all. He won it just from the question itself, because he already owned Dana at that point. But then you go to the post-fight presser after Contender Series, and you have the way they frame the question is a complete and utter embarrassment to this media member. They might as well not call themselves media anymore. They're glorified publicists. At least that's the way I took it. We're going to look at that in a second as well. Now, I want to highlight for you, in case you haven't been watching my channel for a long time, I have a full Francis Ngannou playlist where I covered every aspect of this from start to finish. But just a quick synopsis of this situation: Francis Ngannou used a sunset clause to get out of his UFC deal, which was 5 years after the day he signed the deal. He left the UFC because of the sunset clause that was added due to the antitrust lawsuit that they have since modified. Francis Ngannou left the UFC, signed with the PFL to a massive contract, a little bit more than what the UFC would have offered him for a base contract. And then he also had the ability to go box, as well as a bunch of other incentives. He went and boxed Tyson Fury, made over $10 million. Then he went and boxed Anthony Joshua. There's rumors he made about $20 million. We don't have exact numbers, okay? I'm going to show you the evidence that we do have, some of the reports that we do have. We don't have exact numbers, but we know that Francis Ngannou had a lot of post-UFC success just in boxing alone. And what I've covered for a long time is the UFC, whether it be Dana White or his surrogates, i.e. Chael Sonnen, what they want to try to convince fans, and a lot of fans were on board for a while. I feel like public perception has shifted a little bit, but they want to knock Francis Ngannou because they want Francis Ngannou to be a cautionary tale. That's why for a long time, Francis Ngannou was a punching bag of Dana White, Chael Sonnen, in the MMA community, because the Dana White sycophants were following along with him. And they were crapping on Ngannou because they didn't want Ngannou to inspire other fighters to do the same. That's what they didn't want. It's like, I always say, it's like a bug's life. If you let one ant stand up, they might all stand up, and then there goes our way of life. And that's exactly what Dana White is pissed about. So let's jump right into the interview, because this interview, I mean, I had a shit-eating grin the entire time I watched this. You could watch, look at Dana's face here. This is right before Kevin Ioli gets out the Francis Ngannou question. Watch his demeanor change, and then he loses his mind literally for a couple minutes. Now, before I play this, I will link this full interview down below. I encourage you to go check out the full interview, comment on it, like it, and subscribe to Kevin Ioli's channel. This is great content that he's bringing us. So you guys need to at least go do that. That'll be linked down in the description. Listen to this.
Let me ask you one question then about Francis. And
by the way, of course, he's got the Power Slap cup on hand.
Ngannou doing that, right? So he fights the Tyson Fury fight, makes a shit ton of money. And I thought the fight wasn't very good.
Look at his demeanor change now. Look at his demeanor already. Look at his demeanor change. He's not happy. You just said he made a lot of money. Don't you say that, Kevin.
But because it was close and he knocked Tyson Fury down, he gets another fight against Anthony Joshua and makes an even bigger, pile of money. So I am not a fan of crossover fights, and I am always saying no, no, no. And that's one of my issues with Jake Paul, right?
By the way, I hate crossover fights too, by the way.
All these crossover fights that he does. But isn't Ngannou evidence that for some people it works, right? Because Ngannou made more money than he would have had he stayed either with you or been fighting MMA in the PFL, right?
Look, I know some people are going to say Kevin Ioli didn't give enough pushback and I'm giving him a pass because I like him or this or that. This question alone was a checkmate. That's it. He needed to say no more. Dana White then proceeds to lose his mind. This was golden. And look at that smirk, man. He's not happy. I'm going to rewind that. I want to listen to the tail end of that again. Because again, they want it, if you've been watching the channel, how long have I been telling you? They wanted Francis Ngannou to be a cautionary tale. That's why they had Chael Sonnen out there banging that drum no matter what. They didn't want him to be an inspiration to other fighters to try to do the same because it makes Dana White's job harder. But let's carry on here. Let's watch Dana White absolutely melt down over this.
Jake Paul, right? All these crossover fights that he does. But isn't Ngannou evidence that for some people it works, right? Because Ngannou made more money than he would have had he stayed either with you or been fighting MMA in the PFL, right?
That's not necessarily true.
Really?
Not necessarily true. That's the bullshit publicly that people believe, but that's not the truth.
That's not the truth. That's not the truth. I'm not going to release any details, but that's just not the truth. That's not the truth. Kevin Ioli's face here. Dude, I swear Kevin Ioli better count his days. Kevin Ioli better count his days, man. Dana is thinking about it. Cutting ties. I'm telling you right now.
The PFL, right?
That's not necessarily true.
I'm telling you right now, if just for this question alone, if Kevin ever needs a kidney, I'd give him a kidney. That's how much I genuinely enjoyed this exchange and this question, this question alone. But let's carry on before people jump down the comments complaining about it.
That's
Really?
not necessarily true. That's the bullshit publicly that people believe, but that's not the truth.
Okay. So he would have made more. Okay.
So if it's not true, why don't you tell us the truth then, Dana? Fill us in, buddy. Fill us in.
Total bullshit.
All right. So we'll move on from that.
And then look, Kevin's like, okay, you're not going to say any more. Let's just move on then. If you're not going to give us any details of why it's a lie. And he starts to move on. And then Dana's like, oh no, I can't let this go. I can't let this go. And he proceeds to have his meltdown.
That's that whole myth that makes everybody go, oh, fucking go to boxing and all this fucking bullshit. Boxing don't work, Kevin.
Right.
Boxing doesn't.
Why doesn't it work? What is it? What is the thing that makes it? I have my own take, and I've written it many times.
What makes it work?
Boxing doesn't work. This is a guy who just recently said, I'm in when discussing boxing. He's been saying he's getting into boxing since like 2016. He used to have the Zuffa boxing shirts. Boxing doesn't work. He's complaining about boxing, but yet he's getting into boxing. And you could say, oh, he's going to try to fix it, whatnot. But it's just crazy for him to say boxing doesn't work at all, yet that's the business I want to get into.
What makes it not work? What makes it struggle?
Fucking trillionaire to make fucking fights. Okay? And even Saudi trillionaires get tired of the fucking bullshit.
Has
it's all
Turkey
a fucking
said it?
myth. It's all a myth that puts out like the whole statement that you just made to me that's absolutely positively not true.
Absolutely positively not true. Well, here's Forbes. Here's Forbes' report. His drawing power is only increased based on Ngannou's showing versus Fury, and the fight saw him floor the lineal champion before losing a controversial unanimous decision. There's every reason to believe his payday before pay-per-view sales and sponsorships kick in could be approaching $20 million. Now, I understand that's kind of vague. Okay, we have to be honest, that's kind of vague. But most likely, we know he made over $10 million for Tyson Fury. Most likely he made probably 15 to 20 million. They were gifting him a watch worth like 300 grand. The UFC was paying him 600 grand a fight. Now that's before he signed a new contract that they were offering him, but they were offering him somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 9 million. okay? And they weren't offering him any other concessions. So he said, you know what? I want to box. I'm going to go box. I can sign another contract with PFL, make the same amount of money you're giving me. And I know people are going to scream, pay-per-view points, pay-per-view points. We have no idea the exact pay-per-view points offer that Francis Ngannou was given, but I looked it up from the lawsuit based on some older numbers for like people like Brock Lesnar. It would have been like $2 million even for a massively successful pay-per-view. So to not factor in everything is crazy. And then here is, just a headline. Francis Ngannou says he made $600K in last UFC fight, reported $20 million purse versus Joshua. That's the Bleacher Report right there. So there you go. But let's get back to this interview. Let's get back to this interview because it's a total myth, right? It's a total myth.
It's those type of fucking statements and those type of, quotes by the media that makes all this shit. All these fights are happening. It takes a Saudi fucking trillionaire. Every fucking guy that tries to do the boxing thing, they all end up losing shitloads of fucking money.
And by the way, again, he says he's getting into boxing. He announced this, last week, the week before? And also, and he comes back to this again, it takes a Saudi trillionaire. So basically what Dana White is saying is it's a myth because if there wasn't somebody willing to pay them the money that he's paying them, then it wouldn't exist. I mean, that's a non-statement. You can say this is a new business venture that may not work out, which is Saudi Arabia paying everyone ridiculous amounts of money. You can say that. But to say it's a myth is if this guy doesn't exist and he's not paying people massive paydays because they don't care because they have billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars. The public investment fund is a ridiculous amount of money. It just makes no sense. Yeah, if there wasn't a guy willing to pay, then it wouldn't exist. Makes no sense.
And the model doesn't work. A Saudi unlimited amount of money pops up, and that's what makes these fights happen. And even guys with that kind of money get fucking tired of the bullshit.
By the way, you know what would have been a perfect answer to this question? And now I'm losing my voice. Dana's apparently losing his voice. He should have said Francis had success, but this was an aberration because of what Saudi Arabia is doing right now. I doubt it's ever going to happen again. Could have easily said that and moved on. But he doesn't want Francis Ngannou to be the story of the guy, the one ant that stood up. And then everyone else is like, you know what? I want to try that. I want to try that. I want to try that. And in a weird way, even though the way he's presenting it, Dana's lying here and misrepresenting things. The general premise of what he's trying to say, I actually kind of agree with, but we'll break that down in a second. Let's watch the rest of at least this clip before we jump to the next timestamp.
Even though, and I got this whole thing every fucking day. I'm not kidding you, every day. Literally just said it to fucking him last night when he got home. Said it to fucking 3 other guys before that. At the fight in Ireland, I said I'm in. And then
he's referencing what I'm talking about, where he's at a press conference saying he's getting into boxing, which he's been saying countless times over the years. And I'm assuming he's still going to actually do it this time, but probably not. Who knows? He seems like he might be backtracking right here.
I start reading stuff and looking at stuff in the boxing world, and I literally say to myself every day, am I fucking crazy?
Yeah.
Why do I want to even think about doing this?
By the way, what Dana's talking about, and I don't know enough about the breakdowns and the profit shares between boxers and promoters, and I don't know enough about the boxing world, but to summarize what Dana's saying is he's saying the top level boxers get paid too much, is basically what he's saying. That's why it doesn't work. There's not enough profit for me in it, is basically what he's saying.
I must be fucking nuts. It is the most fucked up business, and all these sound bites like the ones that you just had are all so full of shit that it makes everybody fucking believe that that shit is true when it's not, and it makes everything worse.
Yeah, it makes everything worse. These sound bites that aren't true. These sound bites that ain't true. And we're gonna get to this in a second. We're gonna get to this in a second because this happened soon after this interview dropped. But it's just crazy to me that he can't let this go. They erased Francis Ngannou from the countdown for the Adesanya Duplessis fight. Okay? They talked about, I forgot what fighter it was. They said it's the first Cameroonian fighter in the UFC. They tried to erase Francis Ngannou from history. They tried to paint Francis Ngannou as some villain, as some greedy fighter who screwed over the UFC, when in reality, all he did was say, look, thanks but no thanks. I'm going to go field other offers. And look at the animosity that Dana has at just suggesting that Francis Ngannou may have made the right decision for him. And, if Francis loses in PFL in his next fight against Renan Fajeda later this month, he's going to have a field day. And I guarantee the media will ask him about that. By the way, when he dropped Tyson Fury and arguably won that fight, the media didn't ask Dana anything about it. Radio silent. Then the second Anthony Joshua brutally chinned Ngannou, they asked him, what you think about how brutal that KO was? I'm not kidding. I've covered this in the past. Dana was basically mocking Ngannou for getting KO'd against Anthony Joshua, all because he doesn't like the way Ngannou did business. Next clip we're going to look at from this interview just shows that Dana is talking out of both sides of his mouth. Listen to this.
To think that every boxing match that goes on should be paid like that, it just doesn't work. It's broken, and it doesn't work, and everybody fucking knows it. But everybody wants to, talk all the bullshit about, this guy made that much money, this guy made that much money. If you didn't have, a Saudi sheik running around right now, throwing the kind of money around that he is, right? None of these fights would have happened. It took a guy like him to make fights that other people couldn't make to happen.
So again, if you didn't have a Saudi trillionaire, billionaire, whatever he is, throwing around money, this stuff wouldn't happen. Well, he exists. That's like saying if the Fertitta brothers didn't exist, you would be nothing. The UFC wouldn't exist. It would have been bankrupt years ago in the 1990s. It's a non-statement. But what Dana is trying to do here is he hates that his fighters are constantly talking about going to boxing to make more money. Because in the majority of cases for UFC fighters, that is not going to be the case. It's a rarity for a fighter from the UFC to go to boxing and make these ginormous paydays. And Dana is infuriated that anyone could even be inspired by Francis Ngannou. And you know what may be one of his biggest regrets? Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather. Because that was kind of the inflection point. Prior to that, no fighters were talking about boxing. But then they saw Conor was able to do it. So then you have other guys. More recently, Sean O'Malley talking about doing it. Then he got his back blown out by Merab, and Tim Welch couldn't have saw a double leg coming. Maybe they should go to boxing. But fundamentally, I kind of agree with Dana. I hate that we hear fighters constantly dreaming about going to boxing. You have Kamaru Usman talking about he wants to box Canelo. He hates that his fighters are looking for bigger paydays in other sports. That's what he hates. And I understand that, but you don't need to lie about Francis Ngannou because we have estimates, again, of around $30 million. For what he would have got against Jones would have been $8 to $10 million. He lost to Jones. He probably would have been de-escalation in pay. Okay? And you could talk about the pay-per-view points all you want. There's no way the pay-per-view points were going to be more than $5 million. So if you want to say, the promotion for Ngannou Jones was crazy and then Ngannou flatlines him, then maybe there's a rematch because that's Jones' first ever loss and then he wins again. And, maybe you can say that. 2 boxing matches, which was a dream of Francis Ngannou's career. He made roughly $30 million, and he still has the PFL contract to fall back on, where he's going to be making roughly $10 million a fight with PFL as well, which I covered that in another video. I'm going to link my full Francis Ngannou playlist down in the description. But then we get to Dana White's Contender Series. And if you look at Kevin Ioli, he asked that question, and it was a reasonable question. He didn't say anything rude. He didn't say anything crazy. But he just asked a blatant question, point-blank question, great question. Listen to the way this media member frames this question. And I believe this is the guy from the Mac Life. He should be ashamed of himself. And I feel bad sometimes crapping on these media members because they're in a bad spot. But this is the stuff that drives me nuts. Listen to this. You ain't going to believe this.
Earlier today, you did an interview with Kevin, and you mentioned that it wasn't necessarily true Francis made more money boxing than he would have if he stayed in the UFC.
Right.
My question to you is, you always said, he didn't want to stick around because he didn't want to fight John Jones. Why didn't you mention the fact that he would have made more money to fight John then? It would have sort of backed up your point. Why did it take you until now to bring it up?
Like what? Why didn't you mention he would have made more money against John Jones? I mean, that's kind of what he said in the interview. Why do you have to frame the question like that? The question should have been something along the lines of, we know Ngannou made roughly $30 million for 2 fights. What was the offer you made him, if you don't mind sharing him? You blew up on Kevin Ioli's interview, and you lost your mind over it. So why don't you fill us in? Well, what's the numbers? You rant and you rave and you go on these diatribes about Francis Ngannou. Fill us in. Give us some details, buddy. You're not legally obligated to hold on to those details. So fill us in. Fill us in, Dana. Baldy, pause.
Because why? I don't give a shit. What's the difference?
He is visibly shaken here. He's pissed. And when I say shaken, I don't mean actually doing this, which he does that a lot. He is livid right now. I'm telling you right now, Dana White is livid.
I just think it's interesting for people to realize.
Because I know all the shit that you people don't know. And I don't care what everybody says. It doesn't matter to me.
You look obviously bothered, so why don't you fill us in?
But that's a fact. He was offered more money. Because I know the real numbers. I know the real numbers. And let me tell you what. I don't want to call him out, but let me tell you what. He'd have done anything to make that fucking fight.
I'm assuming he's pointing to Hunter Campbell. But yeah, he would have done anything to make that fight. I remember a while ago, I'm just going to rewind a little bit. Because Dana's clearly pissed here. I know the real numbers.
I know the real numbers. I know the real numbers. And let me tell you what. I don't want to call him out, but let me tell you what. He'd have done anything to make that fucking fight. And he tried to. Yeah.
You also mentioned in boxing,
Well, you didn't make it. In the past, he said, Hunter went to more dinners with Francis Ngannou, like Francis Ngannou's obligated to sign their contract that gave him no concessions of what he wanted because he took him to dinners. Hunter threw the kitchen sink at Francis Ngannou. It doesn't matter. He moved on. Who cares? Why are you crying about it? What are the numbers? What was your offer to Francis Ngannou? Since you want to speak so loudly and boldly about it, yeah, I know the real numbers. Nobody knows the real numbers. Fill us in then. All you had to say is, look, I was going to give Ngannou $15 million a fight. So I know he made less than that on average from Saudi Arabia, whatever he wants to make. Turki Al-Sheikh. By the way, is Turki Al-Sheikh telling Dana White what he's paying Francis Ngannou? Is that what he's implying here? Let me actually watch this back one more time. Is that what he's kind of implying there? I didn't even consider that until just now. I'm kind of rewinding it back a good bit.
It's interesting for people to realize.
Because I know all the shit that you people don't know. And I don't care what everybody says. It doesn't matter to me. But that's a fact.
Does this look like a man who doesn't care what everyone says? By the way, guys, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and like the video.
He was offered more money. Because I know the real numbers. I know the real numbers. And let me tell you what. I don't want to call him out, but let me tell you what. He'd have done anything to make that fucking fight. And he tried to.
Well, if he would have done anything, we would have had that fight. Because Ngannou was begging for it years before he was fighting out of his deal. That's the facts. And you acted like John Jones was ducking him. Yeah, John Jones is going to move to middleweight. John Jones says he wants to fight, but does he really want to? He said, show me the money. He wants to be paid Deontay Wilder money. I could bring up clip after clip of Dana White being hypocritical and talking about Francis Ngannou and John Jones. The fact remains, Francis Ngannou made the decision that was best for his career. And guess what? It paid off. And guess what? He is an inspiration to other fighters to do the same, even though I hate it. I hate other fighters trying to go to boxing. But guess what, Dana? That's your fault. Maybe you should have given him the opportunity for a one-off boxing match against Tyson Fury. Imagine he came back to fight John Jones after beating Tyson Fury. I know he lost on the scorecards, but everyone gave him that victory regardless. Imagine the hype. And you could have cashed in on that. The John Jones fight would have been even bigger. But unfortunately, Dana White let his pride get in the way. But at the end of the day, UFC's not going to go out of business without Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou is just going to be just fine. He set up his family for life just from 2 boxing matches. But instead, Dana White years later still has to cry and whine about it and blow up and lose his mind just because he was confronted with the fact that Francis Ngannou had success. And by the way, I told you guys he would. Go back and check the playlist. For months, for years, I told you, look, Francis knows what he's doing. If the UFC wanted him that badly, he'll be able to find another suitor. And that's exactly what he did, even though I was the 1% at the time. Everyone told me I was crazy. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.